Hello and welcome to the CBB Super Show. I'm your host, Waddell, aka Deuce85, and we are coming to you live on the FTN Network. As always, world famous FTN Network. We continue to grow, continue to help you build winners on the betting side, DFS side, PrizePicks, Underdog, all that good stuff. Very, very happy to be a part of this team. There is a promotion still going on. If you use that code NIGHTHOOPS, NIGHTHOOPS, 50% off your first month. Any package on FTN Daily. That's the daily, plus monthly, or you can pay the whole annual. Whatever you decide to pay, you're going to get 50% off, which is a huge discount. Considering you get access to pretty much every sport we offer, from NHL, NBA, NFL, college sports, esports, tennis, NASCAR, this, that, the other, everything, we have it. Articles, slate breakdowns, pre-lock shows that are only for subs. We also have optimizers, projections, PrizePicks trackers, every tool, gizmo, and gadget that you can possibly imagine. We have it, and we have a good use for it, and we help you get those green screens at the end of the night, as well as walk those tickets to the window. Very fun stuff. We have a 9-game slate that we're going to cover tonight on DraftKings primarily, and we are getting away from, at least for a night, some of these blowout games. Today had some fun games on it, definitely. Prizes tomorrow are nice. The $15 GPP 2,352 entrants. 10K to first. I have to imagine that will fill. 10K second gets 25, third 1,000, and then of course these top heavy prizes, they go down from there. The difference in $9,900 between first and 10th place, you'll have to be not just perfect, above perfect to hit that 10K. It's a great feeling when you get there. Single bullet's pretty damn tough to do so. 70 is the max entry for that one. Have hit that one in the past. It's a very big shot of endorphins, but it's extremely difficult. And usually the lineup that wins it is not the one that you think it will be. I will say that. All right. On this 9-game slate, we're going to go game by game. We're going to talk a little bit about some Ken Palm stuff. We have a week and a half under our belt, and we have some data we can use. We have some DVP starting to develop already. I know it's 2, 3, 4 games in for most teams, but we are having some stuff starting to develop here. Rotations and pecking orders starting to develop. Pricing today was a little bit off. We did have some nice ones with like Johan Traor, who looked really, really good tonight. But overall pricing was just broken, and it took, 250 plus to do anything on this slate. So we'll go through this particular one with 9 games. You can expect some overlap, but the nice thing is there's a lot of competitive games as well. At the end, I will provide you with a core, at least what I'm looking at this moment. Any relevant prize picks, props, or line betting that I see as well. We will talk about that stuff as well. Generally allot myself 2 hours at the most. Try not to use all 2 hours, but most of the feedback I get is that you guys don't mind. I will put timestamps at the end so you can look at specific games as well. That seems to be a reasonable function for you guys to be able to skip ahead to games that you want to hear about. The slate does lock 1 hour earlier than normal, so 3 p.m. PST, 6 p.m. EST. My man Mike Randall, the absolute legend FAU sports bettor, will be covering the slate in the article form on Tuesdays. Every Tuesday he covers the slate there, but I will be doing my thing every Monday, Tuesday and Friday night for the CBB Supershow, and then Thursday night, Saturday morning for the CFB version of the show for the next month, maybe month and a half. And then we're going to switch things up, and we're going to be doing a lot of CBB stuff once we get into bowl season and after college football as well. It's very early. Don't hang your heads if you had a bad slate, if you had a bad weekend. Do not hang your heads. It was a great first week for the team at FTN. I see a lot of green screens in the Discord the last 7 days. That excites me. I see a couple in there tonight. We had some really nice hits. We had some foul trouble for guys like Norchad Omir. Important to understand that it's college basketball, and foul trouble is inevitably going to hit you once, twice, 3 times, 10 times, 20 times. You play enough slates, and you will be bitten by the foul bug a lot. Nice thing is there's another slate tomorrow, and you can hit it and get right back to it. So we need to dig in here. We need to get to this 10K prize pool, and we need to find the absolute stones. It might be time. We're getting closer. I don't know yet if it's time to pull out the posh play of the day. We're getting closer. Jalen Tyson was dangerously close to being that designation today, but he came through. Damn near had a triple-double, messed around and had a triple-double. But we're waiting for the right time to unleash the posh play of the day, because I do hold that record near and dear to my heart, and we try to protect it as much as we can. If you're watching live, I appreciate it. If you're watching on demand, I also appreciate it. No matter what, please hit the like button. There are 500 plus of you who end up watching this before lock. I know that doesn't sound like a whole lot, but if I can get like 25% of you to hit the like button, that is a huge, huge boost to not only my show, but the FTN Network as well on YouTube. And it just helps us continue to promote our brand and get seen by more and more people, which then allows us to have better tools, more content, more winning stuff for you guys to pad your bankroll. Also, be sure to interact with the show as we go, or on demand. Drop a comment. I always circle around before lock and answer those as well. A lot of support. I appreciate it. With all that out of the way, let's dive into the slate. And we have some Gavitt games. We have the Champions Classic, and then we have a couple of what Rothbot would call buy games, and then we have some semi-competitive non-con games as well. The Gavitt games will start there. So we're going to go a little out of order for the slate. We're just going to talk about these tournaments and these games. I know Gavitt game's not a tournament, but Champions Classic's not either, but a preseason, contest or whatever. So with the Gavitt games, the first game here, we're going to talk about the Wisconsin Badgers versus the Providence Friars. Turn that bad boy off. Right now, early in the season, wouldn't you know it, Wisconsin has a tempo ranking of 54th, which is really not what I usually think of when it comes to Wisconsin. They're generally a slower team under Greg Gard, but that game against Tennessee forced them to play a little uncharacteristically fast, and that has pushed their tempo ranking up. And I don't know if that's going to actually stay, but at right this moment, it is fairly high. Providence is 195th in tempo. Looking at the starting lineups for these teams, we'll start with the Badgers and what they've been starting in that 10-point loss to Tennessee. Our man Dalton Connect, by the way, he was fantastic in that game. 31% usage rate, 24 points. I love Dalton Connect. I think I will stand by it, and I will say it every single week. North Carolina whiffed hard not getting that kid in a baby blue powder jersey. All right, so the starting five for Wisconsin typically going to be Chucky Hepburn, AJ Storr, who I think St. John's also going to regret letting him go, Tyler Wall, Max Klesmit, and Steven Crowell. In the competitive game, all 5 of those played 26-plus minutes. The bench was fairly non-existent. Nolan Winter played 10 minutes. Connor Essigen, he played 11 minutes, which was not what I expected. I thought Connor was going to have a breakout season, especially with how great he was in his freshman year. And I know that there's going to be the opportunity for him to get more minutes and continue to be a contributor and maybe even bust into that starting lineup. He is coming off an injury, I know, but I still expected him to be ready faster, I guess. And I maybe, taking it easy and slow with him in these, is, especially when you're dealing with a back issue, makes sense. So we'll see how that comes along there. Obviously, probably going to play. He's listed as day-to-day, but, maybe not so many minutes is what we're looking for just yet. If he was full-blown starting, playing 30-plus minutes, even against the Providence Friars, 5-2 is a pretty juicy price for him ordinarily. Tyler Wall predictably taking a bit of a step back with some of the development maturation of some of these Badgers players, and also the addition of AJ Storr, right? Like last year, the team really were lacking in options. So Wall goes from like this role player on crack, and I say that in a good way, as good as one could say crack in a good way, to this like alpha type player last year, and he did quite well. But kind of fell back into that, hey, can we really pay 8.5 and 9K for Tyler Wall? Like, no, we really can't. 7.4 is what he was against Tennessee. That price has dropped to 6.3 now, certainly getting to a playable level, but I would still personally rather play AJ Storr at 5.9, getting that discount, because we know he's going to get usage. He took 20 damn shots against Tennessee, and he's going to be every bit of the alpha that I expected him to be when this season started. Coming over from St. John's, I really was shocked to see Pitino not keep him in St. John's, but the litany of guards that St. John's added, I think Storr, probably the writing on the wall either way. But right now, a 38.3% shot rate, 26.8% usage rate, only 2 of 9 from 3-point range, but he is just attacking. He is getting it done, and he is generating a lot of points. I am very high on AJ Storr here at 5.9 in a competitive game where he's going to play 30, 35 minutes with relative ease. And the price, I think, at the end of the season, we're going to be talking about somebody who's 7.5, 8K most likely, and sitting there at 5.9 is certainly a good price that we want to lock in, almost similarly to Higgins tonight on Bakersfield. And maybe I'm one of the few who feels Storr as a lock and load type play at 5.9, but I just think this is where he's going to be able to show out on a big stage, lots of people watching, and Storr is going to be able to do it. And it's very clear to me that they're featuring him as a alpha type player, with Wall taking that step back. Max Klesmit is always going to be a role player, 3-point shooter primarily, right? Hepburn has the ability to score in bunches, and we saw that against in their first game in 20 points, 13 against Tennessee. But in competitive games, I think Hepburn is a little more useful, initiating offense, providing for others, and maybe not necessarily the go-to scorer. Badgers fans may disagree, but I just feel like Storr needs to have that ball in his hands and needs to be the one scoring when they need a bucket. Steven Krause sitting there at 6'5" as the primary big. This has foul trouble to me written all over it, going up against that front court with Josh Oduro. I would see, he played really well against Tennessee, 14-9, did have 3 fouls there. Their first game in a blowout had 4. I don't think Crowell at 6'5" is really going to be my cup of tea. However, Crowell was getting to like 8K last year, so we know he can certainly fill it up and put up a good number. And 6'5" is nowhere near a fade, must get away from type price, but it's a little bit too crispy for me at the moment. And AJ Storr is just really where I want to go. On the Providence side, Bryce Hopkins, I know, we got to keep the short memory in DFS. Hopkins has these games, Milwaukee there, 30 minutes, 2 for 9, only 23.5 fantasy points at 8.4. His price doesn't budge. In their first game, he had 14 and 10 on his way to 30. Now we have to ask ourselves, is Wisconsin truly going to be into the faster paced style, or was that a product of the Tennessee game? And Providence defensively under Kim English, they're definitely going to have a kind of a wall there in the interior. So we have to ask ourselves, is Hopkins going to stay consistent enough this year and have the conference player of the year like season that we expect him to, or is he going to go the route of long stretches where he just doesn't do anything? And watching Providence games, and it's already starting, he hangs his head and he gets just these stretches where he's just kind of like he's cherry picking, and sometimes it works to our benefit. They get a fast break and he's down at the other end just waiting to get a the dude at the YMCA was like, I'm open, because you're not playing defense, man. So Hopkins at 8.4 still on that line of like, damn, I really feel like we need to play him there. But I do have some concerns here against Wisconsin. And there are enough other players on Providence that have to contribute and are going to contribute to the point that I don't think he's going to have this usage rate that is so far and above and beyond everyone else. As of this moment, it's 25.5%, which is definitely solid. When you looked at last year, it was about the same, but especially once conference play began, they were leaning on him heavily. And he was doing majority of the work, especially when Devin Carter was going into a funk and kind of turned ice cold there for a while, and Bynum was injured. So he's definitely fine. Devin Carter, on the other hand, is, I think, really good. 7.9 is a high price for him, but you're looking at somebody who doesn't need to necessarily score a lot. He's averaging 13 real points, but look at his blocks, look at his steals, assists, rebounds, contributing in all categories. I do not think that is a non-con hero type of kid right here. I think he's going to continue to play at a very high level as they face other high-tier competition and as they get into the conference play. I would be very, very shocked to see him not maintain a 30 to 35 fantasy point per game type of average. As of now, 21.5% shot rate, shooting 36% from long range, 30% assist rate, a block rate of 6%. That's going to regress some, and a 3.5% steal rate. Playing lots of minutes. He'll be on the floor a lot. He is my preferred option over Bryce Hopkins. Now, Bryce Hopkins offers us guard forward eligibility, which we love, but I could see this turning into a little bit of a like Carter versus Store mano a mano type thing. And I don't know, if Hopkins doesn't put down his first 2 or 3 shots, like you just know it's not going to be his game. So it's really tough to play him in our main lineups so early in the slate, which I know has no true bearing on anything. But I have the late game hammer. I'm an old school DFS player. Sometimes I look at times of games and be like, I got to spread this out. And I know it's stupid, but just stuck in my ways. And I don't want to be so involved in the first game that if it does turn sour for Hopkins, I'm out of luck. We have Norchad O'Meara early in the slate, foul trouble. Yesterday, Julian Reese early in the slate, just dog. So it's tough when that happens. And I think that Bryce Hopkins makes a wonderful 10K to first GPP lineup lead play, priority play there. But in your primary head-to-head cash games, all that stuff, single entry, 2-2-2, whatever it is you play, I think Hopkins is kind of a tough sell for me. With some of these other options that we have on the slate. Josh Oduro is interesting at 6'7". There are foul issues there, but he primarily is the one I'm looking to that's going to get people in foul trouble. Early on, his usage and shot rates predictably lower. He does have a fouls call of 5 per 40, but typically you look at the history of his career, he's been right around 3.5 fouls per 40 called, but he's been drawing over 6.5 fouls per 40. So generally, he's the one getting people in trouble, and I could see him kind of feasting in this game, getting that Badgers front court into all kinds of issues when it comes to fouls. And I like the fact that they're featuring him in the block when they can. He's contributing in all categories. And he's definitely familiar with the Kim English system coming from George Mason and somebody at 6'7" that, in the past when he was at Mason, I think he was like 8K at times, certainly makes a balanced build for me. So I'm looking at one of these Providence guys between Carter and Oduro. The ticket gains, Devontae gains, drama that there was. I tried to warn DraftKings yesterday. They gave me a whole rash of like, we can't DM you, but you can check to make sure. We won't be able to post a tweet, but you can check to make sure. Or what was it, Saturday, I guess? Just real dumb, like terrible experience. And then today I got a DM asking if I wanted to fill out a survey. Sure, let me fill out a survey about how you don't know anything. No, I love DraftKings. Never make a mistake. Great pricing, great product. Love it. Please reach out to Mike Randall with any endorsement opportunities that we have. Anyways, Devontae Gaines at 4.6. So we have that issue out of the way, right? Hopefully we don't have the, ticket Devontae, like big ticket is his nickname, right? Like it's cool to have your nickname as your first name. And then when Pop Isaacs and guys like that, but when it causes issues like that, just throw his damn real name on there like they did and let's go. 4.6K, definitely in play. Going to play mid-20s minutes, taking a ton of shots. He's taken 13 first couple of games, averaging over 5 rebounds per game. He is very, very familiar with this system as well, clearly coming over from George Mason. His rates in terms of usage and shots not going to be huge, but he's a very good defender. He's going to provide us with a lot of stocks, as the kids say, and he is going to contribute in other categories as well. And he will score occasionally. He's just not a very reliable scorer. And at this sub 5K price, he's cheap enough to do enough in rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, those categories where if he only scores 5, really still going to pay off most likely. Other player that is in the starting lineup, Jaden Pierre, sitting there at 4.6, has played 30 minutes in each of the first 2 games. He's certainly a viable option as well, more of a facilitator, although we did see him hit a pair of threes in their last game and did take on more of a scoring role, but he's somebody at 4.6, filling the Bynum role for sure. Definitely a viable value that we can look at. The highly rated recruit, Garwi Duell, barely played. This is interesting. Barely played in their first game, which kind of had me scratching my head like, man, there's talks of this kid being a one-and-done type of product, right? And coming out against Milwaukee, they give him 24 minutes, and he shows exactly why that conversation happened prior to the season starting. In those 24 minutes, 14 points, 2 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 blocks, and 3 steals, on his way to 33 fantasy points. His price stays the same at 4.5. We can probably, Bensley Joseph tonight for Miami went off. How obviously Omier foul trouble and, some other stuff going on. But the amount of ownership on Bensley compared to like Traore, who's coming off a mediocre game, was 70 to 20%. And Duell, somebody who clearly looks to me like just based off that game alone, he's going to see a lot of ownership. And he should. A lot of times I'll look at a game like this and be like, well, this is just an easy look away and fade because he's not going to have a role on this team. That was a one-off. Look at, he scored 30 in 15 minutes. Like, that's clearly not going to happen again. But this is a legitimate NBA talent that is going to, play more and more. And if he works his way into the starting 5, and even if he doesn't, you know how NBA scouts are based off potential. Like, if he gets a first-round promise, he's gone. Even if Providence doesn't make the tournament, even if he doesn't, average more than, 7 and 5, something like that. We've seen several players coming out that barely played off the bench and get to be, when Nazir Little comes to mind, get to be lotto picks because there's so much potential. But Duell, I think, is the real deal. So I like him a lot at 4.5 too, and I'm looking to a lot of value in this Providence game. And I just said I don't want to be stacking it up and just hamstring myself when there are other games available. And already the first couple of slates this week or last week, we saw starting lineup changes. We saw late scratches. We saw some stuff develop, and you needed to be able to swap to some of these guys that were out there because they ended up doing quite well. Just today, what we see, Arthur Kaluma did not buying into the program. Apparently, Tang gave him some harsh words. Late scratch, that wasn't expected. There were some other plays. We were already on Perry, but there were some other plays developing there in the starting lineup that you wouldn't have noticed. So you have to really make sure you have that availability in your lineups to be able to make those changes when they make sense. So I can see playing 2 from this game. With the amount of value at our disposal in it, we can certainly look to play more. There are some solid options up top, like Hunter Dickinson, but that's going to be a tough matchup, of course. Filipowski, who has been really good, and then Judah Mintz, who was awful in the first half the other night, had a great second half. And then you have USC in a fantastic matchup as well. Creighton in a dream matchup against Iowa. So there's a lot of good pay-ups. We can definitely build what the industry loves, the studs and scrubs type build if you want, or you can go full balanced, or you can go semi-balanced, which is what I try to prefer to do, and make 3 very different lineups that all look pretty appealing on this slate. Rafael Castro is not playing a ton of minutes. He's a high fantasy point per minute player there at 4K. If you're running the 70 max lineups in the 10K, he is somebody you want exposure to. He is deserving of more minutes, but there are obviously other front court players in front of him. If there were ever an injury to someone like Orduro or Hopkins, and Castro were to step into a starting role, he would absolutely decimate all. He's very, very good. Most people don't even realize that. But he has the abilities to absolutely fill it up. And then you have Corey Floyd at 3.9 playing over 20 minutes a game as well. So lots to like here for the Providence Friars. And I certainly like the plenty of exposure there and rotating through them as we go. All right, next game in the Gavitt games is Marquette versus Illinois. We've had Marquette on the slate a time or two. Illinois, I believe, not yet. Right now, the offense of Marquette, second best in the country. Defense, 33rd, playing at the with a 116 tempo ranking. Illinois, 270. Their defense, 15th currently, but they've played Oakland and Eastern Illinois. Oakland gave them a game for a while. They ended up pulling away. Marquette, on the other hand, they have destroyed Northern Illinois and destroyed Rider and have looked every bit as good as most people expected them to. The starting five is basically what you would think. They really only lose one player in Max Prosper and bring back Oso Ighodaro, Cam Jones, Tyler Kolek, Stevie Mitchell, and David Joplin, who stops and gets into the starting lineup with Prosper out. The bench pieces, Chase Ross, Ben Gold, Sean Jones, all going to be heavy in that rotation. We're looking at a pretty solid 8-man rotation for this Marquette team. The first time Marquette was on the slate, we had a real nice underprice on Cam Jones. Was he sitting about 6K, 6.2, something like that. Now up around 7 after he dropped a 50 piece on Rider and gave us a solid 31 his first time out, which was on the slate against Northern Illinois. Certainly like him. There is an ankle injury to be aware of for Tyler Kolek. I don't think it'll be enough to keep him out. Right now, his price has sitting there at 8.3 as a real appealing price, but an ankle injury is nothing to mess with. Playing up against a defense like Illinois with harassing guards, I'm certainly nervous about using him. If he were to be out, that opens up more value for us, whether it's Sean Jones or Chase Ross. Ross is sitting there at 5.4, which isn't the greatest price, but he's been very consistent, 21 and 20 in his first 2 games for fantasy totals. And then Sean Jones, who has played 19 minutes in each game, had 23 against Rider. Really solid, dropped 6 assists and had a steal, 4 rebounds, 8 points. Actually has 9 assists in his first 2 games and is looking like he's ready to develop into something further for this Marquette team. Looking at the rates for those guys, Ross has a block rate of 4.5%, 19% shot rate, and he is shooting 3 of 4 from long range early on. Sean Jones, 22% usage rate, 19% shot rate, 32.5% assist rate. You're seeing he's really been a factor there running the offense, especially on the second unit. And then Cam Jones leads the team in usage at 27% and a 32% shot rate. He has made 8 of his first 16 threes through the first 2 games, so he's absolutely chucking. So a scenario where Kolek sits, you still have a lot of shots for Cam Jones, but you likely have Chase Ross sliding into the roster or the starting lineup there at 5.4. Without him starting at 5.4, it's a little bit of a tough ask for me just because he's going to be slightly under 4x. Without Kolek, he has the upside to maybe hit 30. Now, Illinois, like I said, their defense on the perimeter is no joke by any means, but Ross also isn't a freshman. He's got experience. He can handle it, and I think he's very capable of stepping in the starting lineup if it calls for it. Like Jones as a 4K GPP piece because we know he's going to play around 20 minutes. There's a lot to like on this team. Ben Gold also playing relatively strong minutes, 20 in their last one off the bench. If there were going to be foul trouble for Ighodaro or say they're struggling on the glass, they can bring him in. Joplin, who had a very high usage rate and shot rate off the bench last year, even though he's played just the 21 minutes, but that obviously had a lot to do with the blowout. I think Joplin is an excellent GPP play. His shot rate is still hovering around 24%. You saw it around 27% off the bench last year. He pretty much has the green light to just fire away when he comes in, and that's where the primarily going to see his fantasy points come from is with those shots that he's taking. Has already taken 12 threes in the first 2 games. Ighodaro at 7.8. I like that price. I typically like him against front courts that are a little on the soft side. Otherwise, it's a little bit tough for me to get there just because I feel like he's liable to get pushed around. Has been solid in the first 2 against a power teams in Rider and NIU. You could definitely use him for GPPs. He wouldn't be a main team play for me at that 7.8 price point, but he's certainly in play no matter what. And then Stevie Mitchell at 5.8 is just pretty much a never for me. I know he had 22 in his first game, but he's so inconsistent, and unless he's like 4 or 5, there's just really no reason to play him. The Illinois side, looking at what they are running, they got pushed by Oakland for sure. Our guy Trey Townsend had a nice game against them. But the starting five of Terrence Shannon, Coleman Hawkins, Marcus Damas, Quincy Guerrier, and Ty Rogers, and then Dane Danger coming off the bench. Don't love him coming off the bench, but with Domask and Guerrier, I see it. Luke Good, who I keep expecting to have a breakout, hasn't quite happened yet. Justin Harmon and Draw Gibbs Lawhorn. Now, Justin Harmon comes in from a Utah Valley program under Mark Madsen that was pretty damn good. And his price is still at the 7.2 mark, which is basically his Utah Valley price. He's obviously not playable at that price point, but he's a very good player. And it just kind of goes to show you sometimes the transfer portal, as much as I love it and think there's a place for it in college basketball, it's not always right for everyone. And as of now, Illinois, maybe not the right spot for Harmon. As time goes, they may develop and need him further, but he's just not a factor at the moment. Terry Shannon at 7.5 is your top overall Illinois play, and I think that's pretty easy. In a competitive game like this, he's going to be required to play 38, 39 minutes. He's taken 22 shots through the first two games. See, he's hovered right around 30 fantasy points. You certainly want more at that 7.5, but at least you can feel pretty confident knowing that, yeah, Marquette's got solid perimeter D2, but their point guard has an ankle issue. Shannon's going to be attacking relentlessly. He's probably going to get himself to the foul line a shit ton. And if this game ends up being close to the end and we have to play that foul game over the last 5 minutes, who do you think is going to be the one with the ball in his hands, doing the one-and-ones, doing the two, getting all the free throws at the end, racking up points, going from 14 real to 25 real in the blink of an eye because he just took 10 free throws in 3 minutes? That would be Terry Shannon. So at 7.5, Terry Shannon is a priority play for me, and I think everybody else as well. I would expect relatively high ownership across the board on Terry Shannon. Quincy Guerrier is a nice GPP look. I know he put up 31 against Oakland. We know this. We know how Quincy Guerrier operates. He was very good at Syracuse. Oregon was hit or miss. I don't have any trust for him. Does carry guard forward eligibility. That's nice. We typically have an issue filling our forward slots a lot more often than not. But Guerrier in this matchup certainly has an opportunity, but I would be very scared to use him in anything beyond a large field, all throwaway type build. He's just not somebody that I genuinely look at and think is viable at anywhere above 6K right now. Coleman Hawkins, we know he has major upside. He has shown a knack for fouling in the worst times. This is a very juicy price for him. Minutes should be there around 30, and if that's the case, 6-1 definitely puts him in play in all formats. Dane Danger is my GBP play always. 5K. He has a high fantasy point per minute number. You see, put up 19 in 12 minutes against Eastern Illinois, 21 in 19 minutes against Oakland. They're bringing him off the bench, helping with some of the foul issues he's had in the past. But this guy, this is the player that would muscle around Oso Ighodaro. If you're a big Marquette fan and an Oso fan, like, I'm not saying he's not good or anything, but if Danger can stay on the court for 22 to 25 minutes, perhaps, there's just no way he's not at 5X at this price in this matchup, considering Marquette's front court. If he gets it on the block, it's just going to be an easy 2. That's kind of how I feel about Dane Danger. But I know that it's not always going to be there minutes-wise. They have a coach in Brad Underwood that some people really love. He's already been there for like 6 years, by the way. It's crazy how time flies. But if you have played DFS over the last couple of years, Brad Underwood just kind of not the best coach for his rotational, usage of some of these players. And sometimes he just randomly won't use a guy. And that would be my worry with anyone on this roster besides Terry Shannon. I just feel like he'll ride a hot hand. If Ty Rogers is out there, making things happen, he could get 30 minutes. But if Ty Rogers makes a dumb mistake, gets into a little bit of foul trouble, we may not see him again for the rest of the game. And I know he's 4.3, and that's a very solid price guard forward eligibility, but I really don't think we can sit here and say, like, yeah, he's locked into big minutes, because he's really not. And as I said, Luke Good has shown flashes in the past, 3.8, excellent GBP value, but he's nowhere near a main team play at this moment. And then Domask at 8K is just obviously he's priced like he's back at SIU. That's just not a price that we can pay for him right now. He hasn't looked great. I'm trying to figure out his place. Obviously, he came from being an alpha in his mid-major team to being a third or fourth option. They really just need him to be out there for rebounding and defense, but he only has 4 rebounds for the first 2 games, and he's played 28 minutes each of those 2 games as well. If he doesn't start actually contributing, picking up, I could see a scenario where Danger maybe gets back in the starting 5. But as of this moment, Shannon is a real obvious play, and everybody else on Illinois is just kind of like walking on eggshells, or you're just put your young infant to bed and you're creeping out to go work on something, or perhaps you want to go have a cigarette. Maybe that's your thing, and you don't want to wake them up. That's how I feel rostering Illinois is. It's like liken that to waking your young infant child up when you're trying to do something that you don't want to be bothered about, because there's just so much potential for this to go wrong in this game to end up not being as good as I think it looks on paper. All right, the next game here and the last one of the day for Gavitt Games is Iowa versus Creighton. This will be a very stackable game. Now, we know that Iowa plays a very up-tempo style that is very conducive to scoring fantasy points. Their offense is usually pretty damn efficient, and their defense is usually optional. So it's a very, very good scenario. It's crazy, right? Iowa basketball, all about that offense. Defense can be okay, but it's genuinely optional. You look at Iowa football, where defense is rock solid, but offense is genuinely optional. So they seem to be very one-sided in their sports here. If you could put those two together, you could form one really juggernaut-style program here for Iowa. But, yeah, defense, I'm not going to be scared to use people against Iowa very often. When it comes to Iowa, we got to talk about the job that Peyton Sandford is doing. It's only been 2 games, and I got to really kind of catch yourself sometimes, be like, don't get too hyped. It's really early. Non-con heroes is a real thing, but Jesus, Peyton Sandford showed flashes last year. I am very excited about the potential to him playing 32, 35 minutes in this game against Creighton, where it could very well go down to the wire. 28 minutes against Alabama State in a blowout game, 17 real points, 4 of 10 from downtown, 12 rebounds, 4 assists. Give me that double-double all day. Against North Dakota, he had 21 points, 3 for 7 from downtown, 9 rebounds, 2 assists, had a couple of steals, just major contributions. His usage rate in that one was 35%. Just a really, really amazing stuff out of him early on. And if he's going to be playing like that this year, this Iowa team is going to be very, very scary. 7-5 is a bit steep, especially going against a Creighton team that can definitely contain him to a degree. I'm also waiting to see, is Sandford going to turn into a pumpkin at some point? I'm on the fence with him 50-50 if he's actually a non-con hero or if he's the real deal. And this game's going to tell us a lot about where Sandford is this year. GPP-wise, another one that I love. I would be very untruthful of me and to be like, yeah, he's locked for 40 points. That's just going to be the easy thing that happens, because if he starts missing shots, obviously his peripherals have been good, but he's going up against a Creighton team that can wipe away his rebounding really, really fast. And when you take a bad shooting night and take away his rebounds, you're not left with a whole lot there. A lot of meat on the bone at 7-5. So I'm certainly in on him, but I maybe not as high on him as other people are at this moment. But he's definitely on my radar and dangerously close to being a hashtag Waltz guys. You may remember during his freshman season, we used him at min price a couple times to squeeze out, a 3X number and hey, this guy's going to be good in the future. Ben Krikke, the transfer that came over, we used him in their first game. He had 30 fantasy points, followed that up with 28. Playing mid or low to mid 20s minutes, expect more. A guy that can contribute in all categories. Looking at the Iowa efficiency rankings, Krikke has a 28% shot rate, 26% usage rate, 14.5% offensive rebounding rate, and a very, very high offensive rating, playing quite well, as good as they had hoped. When I saw the transfer portal additions for Iowa, a kid coming from Valparaiso, that Valparaiso team's pretty bad, but he did everything for them. High rebounding rate, high usage rate, just kind of their everything, right? And coming into a situation with Iowa where they maybe lack a front court enforcer. I know they have Patrick McCaffrey, but he's a little more finesse and toughness at times. But having Cricky there is to fill that role that we've seen in the past. Obviously, we had our guy, Philip Rabacha, the last couple of seasons. We had the Murray brothers, and I'm not suggesting that Cricky's going to put up numbers like the Murrays, but I certainly think Rabacha, and you might be quick to forget, put up like 30 fantasy points per game pretty often the last month or two of the season. I think Cricky kind of fills that role and plays a similar way as him as well. The rest of the starting five: Tony Perkins, Patrick McCaffrey. Perkins at 7.3, he's just okay. He's a guy capable of putting up 35, and when he does it, you're kind of like, man, why did I miss that one? But generally, you're not kicking yourself for fading him too often. McCaffrey at 5.7, I could see ownership kind of geared towards him. Those mid to low 5K range plays that have been doing well tend to be on the chalkier side so far this year. And there's a lot of downside. I know he's looked good, but I don't know. I'm not a big McCaffrey fan, but I admit his price is nice. The other starter, Dasonte Bowen, is there as another value piece. We're kind of heading into territory like we were tonight, where it's like every team or every game, there's a sub to 5K guy, possibly multiple, that are going to play a lot of minutes or are going to have an opportunity to play well. Dasonte Bowen at 3.7. He played 18 minutes in their second game, which was a blowout. In their first game, which was also a blowout, he played 22. 5 assists, 2 steals, 12 real points, on his way to 27. Obviously at 3.7, anything above 15 to 16, you're feeling pretty damn good. But if you drop to 28 here against Creighton, unlikely. But he might see some ownership there because of that, and he is a starter. And people tend to look at starters, cheap starters at that, and tend to plug them in and move on. And we've seen that quite a bit so far this first 7-8 days of the new season. With less sites giving information and very little providing ownership projections, we are seeing a very spread out ownership, except for obviously, Zach Edey, because people know him, or cheap starters who have had a very good previous game, or at least one game in their game logs that were good. So that's the type of player that we might see a little bit more ownership on than we were expecting, but there are a lot of cheapies on the slate we can look at, which may water it down slightly. One thing we can be sure of is that the 6 to 7.5 range is going to be very low owned. Jalen Tyson at 21% tonight. That seemed a little bit crazy, but obviously if you're going Edey and another pay up, you don't really have that luxury. Tyler Perry was lower on end again today too. So we can really live in that balanced range, and we can still play one pay up. Like, I was really on Norchad a lot tonight. Everyone was, right? But we saw a lot of Norchad and Edey lineups, and it just kind of cut out the need for Tyson, Perry, those type of guys. But had Edey not scored 50 and Perry put like 34, 35 up, that could have turned out a lot different there. Instead of a min cash for myself and quite a few others, it could have turned into a much bigger day like we had on Friday, when those big pay-ups don't necessarily go off. So kind of approaching this slate that way as well, which means Iowa isn't really my favorite. And I think they're going to be a little bit on the lower owned side, aside from a guy like Bowen and maybe Sanford, which is probably interesting, I know. But the Creighton side, I'm expecting to see a very big boost or spike in ownership. Price-wise, Creighton last year at 7K range was always like, they're priced fairly. We don't really need to go there. They're going to get 3.5, 4X. And that's what they did. Now we're talking about 9-1, 8-6, 8-8. For their top 3 players. We're way higher than we were last year, but we're definitely looking at using them in this matchup against Iowa, because we're going to be able to pick on Iowa a lot. My favorite play has to be Trey Alexander. We've used him. We used him a lot on the first day. I had 33.5 for us. Price goes up to 8.6 the next time, almost to 50. That game in a blowout, like, you can know at this point that Creighton's lack of depth, which it's better than it was last year, there's no doubt about that, but they're still not super comfortable going deep into their bench. And Creighton's going to have a very high efficiency, but we're still going to see starters play 30, 32 minutes in blowout games. Now we're going to a game against Iowa where it should be within 10 for most of the game. Like, I don't foresee anyone getting blown out in this one. So we're talking about Trey Alexander going from playing 29 to 31 minutes to 35 to 38. And if he's going to continue at this torrid pace, and I think he will, he becomes a pretty high-end pay-up for me. Now, people get confused with when I say balanced lineups, and I'm not doing this stars and scrubs stuff. And then it's like, well, how are you getting this pay-up? Well, I am still playing values. I'm not going to look here and be like, I'm going to play Philip Kowski, I'm going to play Trey Alexander, and I'm going to play Judah Mintz, and I'm just going to play all those sub 5K starters for the rest of my spots. And those lineups do fine. Those are not bad ways to make lineups. So I'm not trying to call anyone out, but I really prefer to just take a stand on one of those pay ups and then fill my lineup with as many 35 fantasy point per game scores as humanly possible and hope that they're going to hit their ceiling of 50 that night. At the worst, I've got a floor of 35. I can live with that. I can generally cash most slates if those guys just hit their season average. So as I'm taking a stand here, Trey Alexander is looking like the primary pay up for me. Definitely on his own team against Baylor Shireman, who I do love. I think he's fantastic stat sheet stuffer, but 9-1's a pretty tough ask there, especially since he's not really the alpha. Trey Alexander's starting to kind of grab that role. And then Ryan Kalkbrenner, who, God damn him, just will not rebound. 8.6 price dropped 1K. Now we're talking. Can we get that down to like 7.5? Because then we're really pants tight, shirts off. We're really having a good time at 7.5 on Kalkbrenner. I don't think he'll get that cheap, but he's hovering around these low 20s fantasy points. He's not getting into foul trouble. He's not losing too many minutes. I know Famu played 20, but he played around 28 in the second game. And I think generally we're going to see Kalkbrenner hover around like low 30s when they can get away with having him on the bench or getting a break. So it's tough to recommend using him at 8.6 as well. Obviously, anything in the 10K to first is going to go. You can rotate through this roster and feel pretty good about the matchup. But looking at the 3 top expensive options on this team, it just looks really obvious that Trey Alexander is the best option. And I don't think that I'm the only one that's going to come to that conclusion. So there'll be times where I'll be like, we're the only ones talking about this. Currently, Trey Alexander's 9th on Ken Palm's Player of the Year rankings. That is significant because factors in a lot of efficiency stuff. It's early in the year as well, but generally when guys get in that, they don't fall out. And I think Trey Alexander is going to have a ridiculous season. And it makes me sad because in Dynasty, I drafted him his freshman year. And as I chased a playoff run, I traded him away. Don't even remember for who. They're not on my team anymore. And now I have to watch Trey Alexander average 40 fantasy points per game. So it's pretty sad for me to see, but I'll just use him in DFS to make up for it. 27% usage rate, a defensive rebounding rate of 20%, an assist rate of 25%, a steal rate of 6%, drawing almost 5 fouls per 40. Trey Alexander, this is your team. I'm confident in that. And Kalkbrenner's just better in a secondary option anyways. They're never going to feature him on offense. And Shireman's he's a streaky guy, right? Like he's going to have these games. He'll end up with his 15 at the end of the night, but there'll be times where he's just like red hot from long range. And there'll be times where he's just not making any shots. 9-1's just such a steep price to pay for him. I don't know if I can do it. Stephen Ashworth is another player. He wasn't on Creighton last year, but this is like a last year's Creighton play. 6.5 to 7K, and he's just priced right. I know he was 8-1 to start the season, so people might look at that and say 6.7, we're getting a discount. Let's jump all over him. Certainly capable of obliterating this price, but he's a little bit on the lower end side. I think he needs to come down to like 6.2 at the lowest, just even that $500 before I can really feel gung-ho about using him. At 5.3, we have role player Supreme from Virginia, Isaac Trout. I do like him, but I liked it better at sub 5K, so they've kind of priced me out there. But he is one of the few depth pieces that Creighton has, along with Mason Miller, who has been starting, playing right around low 20s minutes at 5K. His price might dip under 5K after this one. He's somebody to at least be aware of as pricing gets tighter. We have a cheap starter there in Miller. Farabello is still a never for me. I know he's 4.3 playing 20 minutes. If you got to go there, you got to go there, but he's just somebody I really don't want to use. I thought Johnny Lawson was going to be a big-time factor for Creighton right away, certainly looked it in his first game, and then he played the 5 minutes there in the second. I didn't watch the Creighton game, so I went ahead and did my homework. Like, did he get injured? What happened there? And I didn't really see anything to indicate that he did. So minutes wise, maybe not there for Lawson just yet, like I thought. So really, we're coming out of this game with Trey Alexander certainly as my line in the sand pay up. And then, maybe falling in line with Bowen because he's 3-7 or chasing Sanford. Iowa games tend to be very high scoring, as we know. Overtimes at play. The efficiency on offense goes up when Iowa plays. Defense, like I said, becomes optional. I do not think defense will be optional for Creighton, so that could cause an issue there for some of these Iowa guys, but their prices are reasonable, I will admit. All right, next game. No comments. You guys just hanging on every word, huh? Feeling good? All right. We've got the Champions Classic at the United Center in Chicago. Bum, bum, bum. Duke versus Michigan State. Now, Duke you gotta love when Duke loses anytime, but especially when they lose at home. Now, it's tough for me because they lost to Arizona. I don't like cheering for Arizona, but the lesser of two evils, sorry, Forsty, is definitely Arizona when compared to Duke. And in that game, that was a really fun one to watch, and it definitely showed me that Duke, as much as they've been hyped to the moon by the media, they've got the deepest roster. They've got the veteran in Jeremy Roach. They've got the breakout star in Proctor. They've got Kyle Filipowski. They're just going to be unstoppable. The media just hangs. They hang from Duke's underside a lot. And you look at the way it played out, and yes, Duke is deep, but they're so young on some spots. Look at the rotation. And yes, they've got some guys who now are going to be a lot more raw than they are come March. And I admit they'll certainly be improved at that point, and they'll be a lot better, definitely. But I think Duke is susceptible here. And playing against Michigan State, a team that also doesn't look great, that I hyped to the moon, I will own that one, and have a Final Four ticket on them that I got like a day after the last tournament that I felt really good about, and now I'm kind of feeling shaky about it. This will be a really telling game here, and see who kind of steps up from a kind of not abysmal start by any means, but maybe a little bit shakier start than most people expected. In that last game for Duke, Jeremy Roach played 39 minutes, so we can expect him to play most of the game. That's going to have to happen. As long as he stays healthy, they won't be able to afford to take him off. They've got youngsters at the guard spots, or they've got guys like Jalen Blakes who just are nothing more than, hey, you get to come in during blowouts and take some shots. But unless you want to go to the MAC, you're just not going to play minutes in the ACC, my son. But Tyrese Proctor has not looked like the breakout star just yet, but he did play 37 minutes. Filipowski played 30. Did have some fouls and 4, and there was some trouble early. Mark Mitchell, who came back from injury, played 30, and then Jared McCain, who is one of the capable freshmen, at least defensively, played 29 minutes, had 9 points, 4 rebounds, 5 assists, 3 steals. Jared McCain is definitely going to be a guy I think assimilating quite quickly into this system. Off the bench, Caleb Foster, who was very shaky in that game. Ryan Young, who provides a veteran presence. He didn't really do a whole lot. They just needed him to kind of crowd the middle, and that's what he did. And then they ended up playing Christian Reeves, Sean Stewart, and Jalen Blakes under 3 minutes each. So I have to imagine that this is going to play out similar in terms of the rotation and the minutes. Roach, Proctor, and Filipowski are going to play 30+, and Mark Mitchell will probably have to play 30+ as well. Really angling for that Mitchell price to get down there below 5.5. Like, he started out 7K. They dropped him 1K now at 6K. I'm getting close to pulling the trigger because I still truly believe Mark Mitchell is one of the better players from last year's class. I know he doesn't appear to be the case, and he hasn't really shown that with his on-court performance at the collegiate level, but there is a monster of a kid and player looming inside Mark Mitchell ready to be unleashed. And I do truly believe it's going to happen when people least expect it. I just want to make sure I'm on it when it happens, but I don't want to pay a tax for it just trying to chase it. I want to wait. I'm like, let him have a bad game here, drop to 5.2, and then we're going to go. There's going to be a time where I tell my Iowa fan, Mark, who is an MME guy, it's time to go 100% on Mark Mitchell. Like, there's going to be a slate that I say that, and he's going to rock. We're not there yet, but I want to make that clear that Mark Mitchell is if his price drops again, he's going to become a really elite play. The freshman McCain at 5'6", he's certainly looking in play. Give him 30 minutes at 5'6". Yeah, he's definitely able to pay that off. Lower 5K would have been better, but 5'6" is definitely viable for him. And then you have all these cheap guys, right? You know, TJ Power at 3'4", not going to play. Sean Stewart at 4'6", not going to play. Caleb Foster at 4'5", maybe not ready to play a lot of minutes yet. So you're really just looking at paying up to Filipkowski, which I believe a lot of people will do. Looking at this slate and looking at the pay-ups, he's just kind of an automatic 35 to 40, right? Not quite as expensive as Edey. There are some downside. There's foul potential. He could absolutely be under 40, but just understand what you're going into on this slate, that Filipkowski is going to be one of the highest owned players on the slate, at least in terms of the payouts. Roach at 7'4" is okay, and Proctor at 6'5". They're both okay. Proctor is an elite GPP play at this point because I still do believe there's a breakout coming for him, as most of the media expects, and somebody playing almost 40 minutes in competitive games like this should be. I mean, not going to take a lot to pay off 6'5". Did shoot 9 times in that game, just didn't do a whole lot else, and only made 3 of those shots. So Proctor has 13 assists through the first 2 games, though. That is worth noting. The Spartans, I am very shaken by my future on them, but I still feel I have to remind myself and everybody else that, yes, it's still very, very early. The only team that you can like panic about early is America's team, the Washington Huskies, after what we just saw happen yesterday, because Mike Hopkins exists. But I think we could be okay with the Spartans because they have Tom Izzo. They don't have Mike Hopkins. They have a very good defense. They have elite guard play. They have adequate front court play. They have freshmen who are, you know, have all the talent in the world, just need to get minutes and need to get experience in these games. Michigan State has a pretty tough stretch coming up. Not only are they playing Duke, but then Friday they play Butler, which I know Butler's not the Gordon Hayward Butler, but they're good. Then a gimme game against Alcorn State, and then Arizona, Wisconsin, Nebraska, and then Baylor. And then we have a couple gimme games before a conference play. So they have a semi-home game against Baylor, which will be really interesting to see kind of where they stack up against that Baylor team. And obviously the game against Arizona, which is going to take place on a neutral court in California, I believe, in one of those tournaments. So there's a lot riding on this for the Spartans here, and they're going to have to come out of that stretch with, I think, only 1 more loss, man. Like 2-3 more losses might be really devastating. And obviously a setback at home against James Madison team that's going to be a hell of a lot better than people expected is kind of leaving very little room for error there. The guards, Tyson Walker and AJ Hoggard. Walker is definitely the play. He's dropped a 1K to 8-1 after an abysmal game now. There was, you know, potential talk of him not even playing in that game, dealing with the lower leg issue. That clearly was an issue there. And also it was a game that they had full control of. So they're able to pull him back and not make him play, you know, huge minutes like he played in the overtime against JMU. In a competitive game against Duke, we can expect his minutes to spike back up. And 8-1 is definitely in the wheelhouse of possibilities for using him. Only 300 more than AJ Hoggard, who hasn't really looked good at all in either the close game or the blowout. So Walker would be the one that I would lean into there. It's interesting to see Cohen Carr's price at 6'2". I know he was at like mid-6s before. Still not a play, even with Jackson Keeler out for a couple of months here. Malik Hall is a very interesting play at 5'2". People were kind of, you know, complaining about that one. He had a really nice first half at 5'7". He only had the 20 fantasy points. It's generally where Hall is going to be. So when you start getting to these slates where you're starved for value and you need a guy who can at least produce to a degree of close to a 4x number at the 5K range, Hall's that guy. We need to see him shoot more. He took 12 shots against JMU, but he missed a lot, and his confidence was shaken. He was actually passing on shots late in the game, and it was happening again in their last game in the blowout win. So we need him not to pass on shots, and we need him to rebound at a high level too. But 5'2" is definitely in play, at least for me. And then you have Matty Sissoko at 5'1". I know he had a really good game in that blowout win. I would not utilize him in this matchup. foul trouble written all over it going up against Filipkowski. I think he's a pretty safe fade at 5-1. Jaden Akins at 6-2. Getting him above 30 minutes will be crucial to his success. I know he had 4 steals in their last game. That's not something that we're able to rely on. But there's going to be a lot of shots for him. And he flirted with the NBA, came back with the idea that he's going to be a big time shot taker for this team. So far, we've seen Tyson Walker be that guy, but I think a lot of us expected, and he expects, to kind of be that high usage shooting role when they need a bucket. And I think he can be that. It's interesting that he's been producing in other categories so far. 11 rebounds in their first game, 4 steals, 7 rebounds in their second game. He's rebounding at a really high rate. Somebody has to on the Spartans team. Might it be Akins? If he can put together a nice shooting night and start hitting some threes, in addition to his newfound peripheral glory, we could be looking at a really, really nice game out of Jaden Akins here at 6'2" at probably sub 5% ownership. So have Akins in your list as well here as we move along, because I really like him in this spot and think that most people are just going to genuinely ignore him. And then as far as the freshman goes, Xavier Booker is going to be fantastic eventually. Minutes aren't there just yet. Jeremy Fears played 18 minutes. I think we can certainly keep an eye on him at 3-3. I don't know that they'll be able to, as much as Izzo is careful with freshmen, he's one of those coaches that'll play as vets, which I appreciate, but I think Fears is going to make it really tough for him not to be on the court for 20 minutes a night minimum. So he's somebody to look at, maybe not against Duke, especially their veteran backcourt, but I think Fears will have a place in our lineups here sooner rather than later. So that's pretty, and then you have obviously Carson Cooper sitting there below 4K playing his 15 minutes a game. He's not really needed. I think we have other value that we can utilize. So a decent game to obviously watch. And there are plays on both sides here to look at. I think Filipowski ends up chalk. I think Tyson Walker has the potential to be a little chalky. And then GPP wise, Proctor, Mitchell, and McCain, but Akins, I might be calling for the Akins ham game in terms of shooting. If the rebounding and steals and other categories can keep up and he has his breakout shooting game, he could really melt the slate down because he hasn't been able to hit any threes yet, and he's averaging 25 fantasy points per game. So that kind of excites me about Jaden Akins. All right, moving right along here, we have Colgate versus Syracuse. Oh, let's see here. Hey, good morning to everyone but Duke. That's right. We need a Sparty win. Resident NC State fan there. Go Wolfpack. Go Wolfpack. All right. Actually, before we go to Colgate, let's finish the Champions Classic. I forgot I wanted to do it in this order. The other one in the Champions Classic is Kansas versus Kentucky. Big time showdown here between a veteran-laden team in Kansas and a team right in Calipari's wheelhouse. He's bringing in back the 2012 era Kentucky, where he's got a group of youngsters. And I know he has Jesse Edwards, or sorry, not Jesse Edwards, Trey Mitchell, Antonio Reeves playing this babysitter role. And has those guys as veterans and 2 second-year players, but he has a myriad of young freshman, sophomore players, and this is just the way he likes it. Reeves is probably going to be relied upon so heavily in this game. Like I honestly think we see Reeves take 20 to 22 shots in this particular game. Just want to throw that out there right away. So starting with the Kentucky side, and Aaron Bradshaw remains out, obviously. They haven't had Ugonna Onyenso yet. Ardutiero, who is a talented second-year player, still raw, but has the upside if he gets more minutes in concussion protocol. So we'll see what happens there. So far, it sounds like he will be fine and good to go, but sometimes that stuff can be tricky. And then we're really looking at a rotation/starting lineup that I think could have some real problems against this Kansas defense. I'm kind of looking at Kentucky and thinking that people are going to be really hyped for this group in this game, but I wouldn't be shocked if Bill Self kind of stuff Calipari in a locker here. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that Kansas wins by like 30 or something, but maybe not as competitive as people think on a neutral court. You have Trey Mitchell. You have Antonio Reeves as the veteran presence. You have Rob Dillingham, who we had as a kind of a sneak value the other night. DJ Wagner and Justin Edwards. Now, with all the injuries, if they continue and they don't have D'Aro back, Reed Shepherd becomes basically the only guy off the bench, and they run like a 6-man rotation. With D'Aro back, they would have like a 7-man rotation. They have another freshman, Jordan Burks, but I don't know that he can be pressed into big minutes. He's just not ready. So they're looking at a very, very short rotation, which Kansas has a very short rotation. So this is obviously a game we want to look to. In the Kentucky side, there's nobody priced higher than Edwards at 7-1. I would not be surprised to see Edwards have a pocket of ownership. We're seeing a lot of chatter about Edwards. A lot of people are wanting to be early on his breakout. He's absolutely fine. But Trey Mitchell at 6'6" is interesting if he can avoid stupid mistakes, turnovers, and really poor shot selection. Sometimes I feel like Trey Mitchell gets in these games with guards who are forgetting about him. And when he gets a touch, he'll just work himself into a bad shot. So I think Trey Mitchell at 6'6" has a ton of potential, and they'd be wise to work through him. But I think we're going to get into a game where Reeves is just chucking, Edwards is just chucking, and then Mitchell's just going to be like, well, I can't get shots otherwise, so he's going to force up bad shots. That's kind of how I feel like that could play out with him. But that 6'6" price otherwise is really solid. Reeves at 6'3" has to be in the player pool. I don't know that he makes core play status, but I expect a heavy amount of shots from him at that 6'3" price. Wagner at 6'2", he hasn't found his footing just yet. I know in the first game he looked pretty solid with 30, but consider the opponent. In a game against a Kansas perimeter defense that is nails, I would be a little worried about Wagner. I think obviously first-round pick potential all day long, but it's going to take some time for him to get acclimated here. I'd be less worried about Reeves against that Kansas defense than I would Wagner. Dillingham, price goes up to 5'6" after it was, I believe, 4'9". Has put together really solid games in back-to-back, 30 minutes against the Commerce kids. I really like him. I think as a secondary play, he still makes sense even with the price increase at 5'6". But again, the Kansas perimeter defense is something to be worried about for anyone beyond the two upperclassmen on this Kentucky team. On the Kansas side, Hunter Dickinson was phenomenal in that first game. We're all over him as a pay-up. There were so many pay-ups on that slate. He put together 50. Obviously, another blowout. He's only played 20 and 24 minutes in each of the first two. This will be the first time we get a chance to see him play over 30 minutes. He's just so say what you will about Hunter Dickinson, like him or not. He's just so tailor-made to operate as the alpha interior player in a Bill Self offense that just continually nukes and just doesn't have bad games. He'll certainly have bad games, sure. But you know how Bill Self is with his bigs, man. Like, they didn't really have a true big. We saw KJ Adams really thrive last year and Jalen Wilson, but neither one of those guys are what you think of as like a Hunter Dickinson-like center. You have to go back to really 2 years ago with David McCormick and how he just went from this rebounding role player to a dominant big man under this system. And you just know how well Kansas does with various bigs. Dedrick Lawson, Azubuike, of course, like Perry Ellis. I mean, there's just a lot of names here, and Hunter Dickinson's going to be a really hard fade most of the year. It was easy to fade him for Michigan last year when he was chalked because he had guards who didn't know how to make an entry pass. He plays on a team with guards who know how to make an entry pass. And aside from that, he can also step out and hit threes. He's a versatile, so if they've got a slower big man on him, they're not going to be able to hang. They get a weaker, less physical big man on him, he's just going to pound the block. Like, there's really very few players who are going to be able to keep Hunter Dickinson for our game below 35 to 40 fantasy points each night. I truly believe that. So I love Dickinson if you can get there at 9.3. He's second in pay-ups for me behind Trey Alexander. You have with Timberlake, I'll just work down the list here. With Nico Timberlake, a Towson, a stud, an alpha, You see here a transfer coming off the bench, playing very few minutes, 7-3. He's not playable. He's just not the same role. I did think he would be a starter from day one. That's for sure. So to see him, in that first game, not start, second game not start, and really not even break in, and they're playing Elmarko Jackson, who's clearly more ready for this level than Timberlake is. So he's just going to be more of a role player. He may have a use later on, but we saw this same thing happen with a different transfer, a high-scoring transfer that came into Kansas over the last couple of seasons. And then we saw how that worked out. And of course, I'm talking about Joseph Yesefu, who just was relegated to bench duty and hardly played after completely nuking for Drake. And you see he's already playing a starter's role for Wazoo and impacting the game in more ways than one. So Timberlake is a guy who can play, don't get me wrong, but he's just not going to play for this team very much. Kevin McCullough at 7-2, a threat to, double-double. He's kind of got those baby triple doubles. They're not the real thing, but the 15, 7, and 8, like those type of stat lines where you're like, might he get a triple double, kind of like what Jalen Tyson did tonight. McCullough's he's so good. Love him. If you forego the studs and scrubs build and you go with a more balanced approach, I think McCullough is a flagship play at 7-2, somebody that you certainly want to have. He's already taken 21 shots in the 2 games, so you're seeing more volume there, looking for his shot, not taking bad ones, letting it come to him, while also setting the table for others, rebounding, and working really hard on defense, which is why he's going to play a lot of minutes in this game against Kentucky. KJ Adams at 6'4". Oh, it's a little higher than I want to pay. I think he's probably where he should be at 6 to 6'5". I'll rather just play the KJ Adams props, the PRA prop, which he already hit in back-to-back games. Generally, DK gives us like 13.5, 15.5, 16.5 points, rebounds, and assists. And I'm just going to look for that. But I do like KJ Adams. I just don't know that there's enough upside for us here on the slate at 6'4". And then DeJuan Harris, not an offensive, guy. Last year he had to shoot more and he had to score more because Kansas was very limited at times with their options. But Harris he's got a healthy McCullough. He's got a Adams who can shoot jumpers now, and he's got a center in Hunter Dickinson that just all you need to do is give him the rock in the right spot and he's going to score. And you see Harris has 15 assists to just 2 turnovers in the first game, and he has in the first 2 games, and he has just 2 points on 4 shot attempts. He didn't even take a shot against NC Central because he didn't need to. One of the better on-ball defenders that you'll find. He's going to harass the shit out of these Kentucky guards. He's not going to get tired out because he's not going to have to work for shots. He's just going to set the table for others. He's probably going to threaten 8 to 10 assists in this game, have a couple of steals, and just do his thing. But we need him to be in the low 5K range, just because he's not taking any shots, and he probably won't be taking any shots anytime soon playing with Hunter Dickinson. Elmarko Jackson, good GPP spot at first, him at 6K. Something about playing other highly rated freshmen in the class there will have him up for this one. Did play 29 minutes in their last game. I think we see him creep over 30 minutes here as well. More of, like I said, a GPP play, though. You'd rather just find that 1,200 to get to McCullough, or just say to yourself you're going to pay for Dickinson, really kind of where you'd want to be at. And then you have Parker Brown, Christian's brother. He's been fantastic, man. He was pretty good at Santa Clara. He was okay at Missouri. And now you're seeing him just start off lighting it up from all categories. 22 fantasy points in their first game, 10, 5, and 3. Had 3 block shots in their last game. Consider the opponent, though. We're probably looking at him at around 10 minutes in this game, maybe more if there's foul trouble. And you have to consider the fact that he's priced at 5'9". We can't pay 5'9" for Parker Brown right now unless he becomes a starter and Dickinson gets hurt and all hell breaks loose. We're not using him. It is worth noting that Johnny Furby at 3'5" played 20 minutes. The first game he played 17. So they are giving him minutes. He's working through his little leg issue that he had at the beginning of the season. But in competitive games, he's a big candidate to have those minutes evaporate. So before you go there or you try to get too cute, just consider that Bill Self, he's the number 1 candidate to not play very much in this competitive game. From Bill Self's standpoint, freshmen generally end up on the outside looking in. or younger players, inexperienced players, and he's just not going to end up playing a whole hell of a lot, I don't think. He has the size, though, and I will say Self is a little bit more lenient with freshman bigs than he is guards. You might say, well, what about Grady Dick? Grady Dick was kind of a one-off. But Furphy is got range too. He's a versatile big. If it might not be the year for him yet, but next year when Dickinson's gone, Johnny F is going to be our guy. Rest assured, he's going to be awesome. All right, so that wraps up the Champions Classic. Really big focus on McCullough for balanced builds or Dickinson as one of your pay-ups. On the other side, Antonio Reeves, just because he's going to take a ton of shots. All right, next game, we are going to talk about some non-Gabbett game Champions Classic contest. Colgate versus Syracuse. It's a new look Syracuse, trying to get away from the zone a little bit, still playing some of it, maybe at 50-50. Playing a Colgate team that beat them last year 80-68 under Matt Langle. They really kind of an embarrassing loss for Syracuse. And then they beat them the year before as well, 100-85. Both of those games on Syracuse floor. This game will also be on Syracuse floor. Can they produce a third victory in 3 years in a row over Syracuse? There's a good possibility. This Colgate team's no joke. Looking at the game 2 years ago, I'll just give you a blast from the past here when they beat Syracuse 100-85. They hung 100 points on the Syracuse team. Nelly Cummings, Tucker Richardson, Ryan Moffitt, Keegan Records, and Jack Ferguson. That was a hell of a starting five in the Patriot League. Last year, an 80-68 win. They used their defense to really stifle Syracuse. Benny Williams had 17 real. Judah Mintz had 20. Jesse Edwards had 5 blocks, but wasn't really a factor. They did a good job keeping it away from him. Tucker Richardson scored 30 in that game against them. Ryan Moffitt had 15 and 6. Keegan Records still around as well. That's a really good Colgate team. Now, looking at Colgate, they did beat Brown in their first game, 72-70. They have Keegan Records, Braden Smith, and Ryan Moffitt back, all veterans. Records and Moffitt, upperclassmen, seniors. Smith, technically a sophomore, but all of those guys played big minutes on last year's team. Jeff Woodward, the same case as a veteran player. So the starting five: Records, Moffitt, Smith, Woodward, and Nicholas Luis Jacques. That will be the group they run with. Off the bench, you're looking at a rotation with Sam Thompson, Chandler Baker, and Brady Cummins. Now, Moffitt is a candidate when they do go zone to play some high post, and possibly even Keegan Records, who has done pretty well in the past against the Syracuse team too. Looking at the prices, they're pretty fair. Records coming in at $7K. He's definitely playable. He has the ability for passing and shooting to really hurt Syracuse when they do go zone. Moffitt at 5'9". He's got 30 plus minute upside there. He's a guy that is a lower fantasy point per minute player, but this is a matchup he can definitely play well at. He has GPP viability for that reason. Woodward at 4'7" is in play because of starting status. And then you have Nicholas Luis Jacques at 3'5". Played 28 minutes in that first game as a starter against Brown. Took 7 shots, was highly efficient, made both of his threes, and made 5 of his 7 shots. Very scoring reliant, but at 3'5", this is a decent enough value. I'm not as confident as I was in Johan Traore today. There's sometimes those values come across your table and you're like, man, I can't imagine not playing that guy. Minutes are going to be there for Louis Jacques, so I'm certainly on board with using him. If you take just one player from the Colgate side, I think it would probably be him, or you go up and take Keegan Records, who I think is going to do some damage here. Braden Smith kind of takes over the alpha guard role for Colgate. They've had some good ones over the years, as we mentioned, with Nelly Cummings and a few others. Smith, 17 and 5 assists, along with 3 steals against Brown, a very key player against them. 6'6", he's in that price point that people are they're not going to get to. They're either going to go higher or they're going to go lower. It is just one game, but worth noting his usage rate is currently third highest in the country. But again, one game, 35.5% shot rate, 44.5% assist rate, 44.2% usage rate, and a 7% steal rate. I do think Braden Smith is going to really flourish this season. And if you look at last year's efficiency rankings as a freshman, He is from Seattle, by the way. That's why I'm kind of harping on him. 22.4% assist rate, a usage rate of 21%, and shot about 36% from long range on 95 attempts. Automatic at the foul line and right around a 2.5 to 3% steals rate. So he's going to give you steals. He's going to give you some assists. He's going to take lots of threes. He's going to be a problem for the Syracuse defense. Although I do think Syracuse, they look like an improved group. They don't look so dead. The last couple of years of Boeheim's tenure just seemed like the teams, not that they gave up, but man, they just poke them with a stick, because I wasn't sure they were alive most of the time. So between Smith and records, those are your top, like, pay up type plays, and then Louis Shocks as your value. You got a decision to make if you want to play Judah Mintz. I think Mintz probably sees a decrease in pricing simply because he's up to 9.6, almost 10K. And there will be some that try to stuff in Mintz and Dickinson and maybe another play up. And I do think Trey Alexander, right now, it makes sense to me for him to be higher owned, just because there's a slight decrease in price, and their output's probably going to be pretty similar, but I think Alexander could even score more. We saw the JJ Starling show last game. The first game, Starling he couldn't make anything, 3 for 13. He shot 8 for 15 in that second game, and he took on much more of an alpha role on the perimeter, like initiating the offense, chasing after loose balls. He was the one making things happen, and Mintz almost took like a secondary role all the way till like the mid-second half. Mintz was pretty much just standing around, like waiting for shots. And it was like, if he's not the one facilitating, he's just not going to pay off. And thankfully, he had such a big second half. He ended up with 40, and it worked out. But it was hit or miss there for a while, touch and go, because he was like creeping with 15 to 18 fantasy points. And it was like, I don't know that this 9-3 kid is going to be the play tonight. But like I said, it worked out. But JJ Starling is 5.5 compared to Mintz 9.6. And I don't know that Starling is not the alpha. And ultimately, it's just probably going to turn out to be a shared backcourt where they're going to have to learn to coexist. And one guy gets the shots, one guy gets the passes that night. But ultimately, I think both settle into like a 30 fantasy point per game role. And if that's going to be the case, and they're going to score similar, why are we paying 4K more? We're probably just taking JJ Starling here, right? So 5.5. I hate to be chasing, but we know from last year at Notre Dame, he's definitely a worthwhile prospect and DFS option that we can utilize. And he's been playing mid-30s minutes here at Syracuse. His first game he had 21 fantasy points. So it's not as if he was like, oh my God, so terrible, our lineups are dead. So that 5.5 price on Starling just makes too much sense. Now, we did learn a hard lesson last game, and it was that chasing bench value pieces might not always be the play. Quadir Copeland, I fell into the hype because the Syracuse beats and the message boards, like, Copeland's our guy. He's just going to be phenomenal off the bench. And he's definitely athletic as hell and contributing. And he had 5 points, 4 rebounds, and assists in that game against Canisius. But 16 minutes to carry him to 27. They ended up playing their starters a lot more. And in games that, as we get going here, that rotation for many teams is going to tighten. And I don't know that Copeland's going to be a 30-minute per game guy, right? He's going to be probably 15 to 18 minutes. So a little bit of a lesson learned there. He wasn't horrible. He almost made 4X anyways, but minutes for Copeland are going to be hit and miss. And as Chance Westry returns, I know he's expected to miss a month, it sounds like, maybe more. But as Westry returns and gets acclimated, this is going to cut into more time of Copeland and Kyle Cuffey, who Cuffey went from 23 minutes against New Hampshire to 9 against Canisius. So they're cheap, and these guys all have upside with minutes, but we have to probably really kind of try to maintain our starter status. Chris Bell played 26 minutes. They upped him from 19. Still not very good, but he's 4K. Naheem McLeod shut my mouth because I had got done saying, like, yeah, McLeod's going to play the starter role 12 to 15 minutes. Might as well have stayed at Florida State, a big that plays 15 minutes as a starter. But in 18 minutes, 7 points, 9 rebounds, 5 blocks, just vicious against that Canisius front court, had 30 fantasy points. Do not expect 30 fantasy points from him. He's also 4.8, almost 5K, so temper expectations. And look at the minutes. 10 to 18. He's going to hover around 18 to 20. And if there's fouls, it's going to be even less. So there will be some that chase McLeod thinking he's just a 30 fantasy point per game player. And obviously that's not the case, especially when Benny Williams returns, which it sounds like is happening. That's going to be even less for Bell and McLeod. Benny Williams he had practiced, done activities, all that stuff. So that suspension could come back at any time from what I've read. But it does sound like he's going to be back and starting. So who will that hurt the most with him returning? And he's 4-2, by the way, which that's going to be a big decision point for this slate. Like, we have an hour in between the first game and those games, so we'll have some time to look and think it over. But I think if Benny Williams is starting, probably have to just plug him in and plan on a cheap forward, like auto play type of thing, because we know Benny Williams has high upside. If he's available but not starting situation, I'm not going to be playing him. However, if you're doing the MME thing, then obviously you need to have Benny Williams exposure, because he could be not starting and then come in 2 minutes later and play 30 minutes. Like, I could see them playing that game too. But for my own sanity and the fact that I'm early on in the season, I put a lot into one lineup. I'm a one lineup guy in the first month of the season. I go over into MME as we get closer to conference play. So Benny Williams is a main team play and single entry guy only if starting. Now, he probably doesn't come in for Chris Bell because of size, and the same with Naheem McLeod. Although I could see Bell coming out of the lineup and just going a little bit smaller, but it's probably, and they're not going to take Starling and Mintz out, right? It's probably going to be a situation in which Justin Taylor is the loser here in terms of losing minutes in a starter spot, but it's really hard to keep him off the floor because he's looked so fantastic. Really taken a step forward this year through the first 2 games. And granted, they played, New Hampshire and Canisius. And I know a lot of people will be tempted to just plug him in at 5K, but this will be worth watching, because if he doesn't start, I think he probably isn't a main team play either. And even if he does, and Benny Williams looming, there's going to be some upside loss there from him. There's going to be some shots lost. He's taken 19 shots in the first 2 games with Benny back and eventually Chance Westry. That's not going to be the case with him. He'll be a spot shooter off the bench kind of thing, and those rebounding numbers are going to tank as well. But as of right now, he's a fine option depending on what that starting lineup looks like. I'm really walking away from this one with JJ Starling. Hate it. I know he's going to screw us all, but at 5'5", how can we not? And Benny Williams to be starting. And then on the Colgate side, I do like the Louis Jockis kid, and I like the fact that Smith and Records come in at a price point that most people just aren't going to get to. And sometimes these low to mid-major players in those range can be hit or miss. We saw with TJ Weeks foul trouble today. We saw with Chance Moore on Slate 1 go apeshit for Missouri State. Like, it can be hit or miss with these guys. I know that. But Smith and Records have a matchup here they can exploit. Just be aware of that. What's up, Jody? DFS Magic and Colgate and Syracuse. Absolutely. All right, next game, Texas A&M and SMU. This is a good little test here because I think people are used to SMU being kind of trashy the last couple of seasons, but they were really talented under Larry Brown and a couple of seasons ago. They had a really good roster over the last few seasons, especially with DFS purposes. But this Texas A&M team, this is going to be a nice little test for them on the road against a much improved SMU team. And Buzz Williams, good coach, runs a rotation that can be damning for DFS purposes because sometimes one guy will get 25 minutes. Sometimes one guy will get no minutes. The starting 5, it seems that it's going to be consistent. That was a nice win over Ohio State, by the way. It seems as of this moment, the starting 5 is looking to be solidified based on, I shouldn't say based on, depending on what happens with Julius Marble. There's a lot of talk that he's just not going to come back to the program or play college basketball ever again. Don't know how true that is. There's some real people on message boards needing to be talked off the ledge. I don't know what's going to happen with him. It doesn't sound like he's going to be back, though. The starting 5 they did run with Henry Coleman, Tyrese Radford, Wade Taylor, Hayden Hefner, and Wildens Levesque. Levesque dealing with a knee issue, so you saw he played just the 4 minutes there. He's been barely playing in either of the first 2 games, even if he's starting. So he's really not somebody we need to look at. He's one of those players I talk about, like the Huskies were doing this with Wilhelm Breidenbach in the first 2 games. They started him playing like 18 minutes. He got benched yesterday though. But you have these guys who just like they're kind of token starters, but they're not going to get minutes in the end of the game. So that would be an instance where he's 4-1 starting, but he's not going to play very many minutes. So don't get sucked into that one. We did like Hayden Hefner, and I know he only had 8 fantasy points in that last slate, but he had 27 minutes against Ohio State. So clearly Hefner is going to be on the floor. The problem is he's probably not going to be a big-time shot taker. Now, in the first game, he took 10 shots and looked pretty solid. Obviously put up almost 30. Just 3 shots against Ohio State, and I think that's going to be more the norm for him. He's going to be out there doing the Fitbit thing. I'm like 3 years behind on trends. I've been saying Fitbit a lot. I know that was like the cool thing to say 8 years ago. But I think he's going to be out there a lot for his defensive purposes, and he's probably going to be a guy that will pan out at times. But shit, I mean, 27 minutes at 3.5 is solid for anyone. But I do think he's probably going to be sitting around 8 to 10 fantasy points more often than not. This SMU team is much better than they were in the past 2 seasons, defensively especially. And I think that Hefner is probably not needed, at least in a main team capacity. He's somebody to rotate in through with some of these other values that we have available to us. And I'm also wondering if Obasake will start to see a minutes increase as well. And if he does, that's going to come directly out of Hefner's role. I think Obasake, he's been banged up a lot over the first couple years of his career, but he has a ton of upside and athleticism. So we'll see what happens there with him. But as of now, Hefner's a low-end value, certainly. Anderson Garcia is a high fantasy point per minute player coming off the bench. Typically, he's been this way for the last 3-4 seasons of his career. Very active, will get after it on the glass, will take shots when they're available. Very decent, very above decent, if you can imagine that term, defender, and somebody who just like really, really aggressive. You see he fouled out in that Ohio State game, but they utilize him in a 20 to 25 minute role. And this is a game against SMU where I would not be shocked to see him actually pan out at 4-1, especially with Levesque having issues. Henry Coleman sitting there at 6-1. That's a decent price for him. I'm not going to chase that 40 fantasy point performance. We know Henry Coleman he's very good at when nobody's on him, meaning nobody rostering him, putting up these just major, tasty, mouth-watering games. And then when he starts to string together a nice little 3-4 game stretch, people are like, okay, I can finally get back into the water again. Jaws is dead. Henry Coleman, we can use him again. Let me dip my toe in. And then he rewards you with a 13 fantasy point game in 28 minutes. And it's like, gosh dang it, why did I fall for Henry Coleman again? So really consider that. 6-1 is going to tempt a lot of people. I mean, I'm pretty tempted as well, but I always talk about having a short memory. There's certain players you just can't have a short memory with. And I don't know that Henry Coleman deserves our love yet. So I would like to see him string together another game or two before I allow him to victimize me with a 2x performance. But at 6-1, he's certainly in play. It's almost like if he becomes chalk, which I don't know, if you will. I'm fine fading him because there's so much downside to rostering him. But even if he's not going to be chalk, I'm still very, very worried. Wade Taylor, the alpha of the team, 21 shots against Ohio State. Very, very good. He's play at 8-2 where people just won't have the luxury to afford, I'm pretty sure. But he's great in this matchup. I know SMU's improved as a defense, but he's just going to take a ton of shots. He's the one that I want to roster. Tyrese Radford, typically a guy who ends up chalky because he's always priced at like 6 to 7K. He's even come down 700 since the Ohio State game. He's going to play 30, 35 minutes, and he does just enough to typically pay off, and he fits as a last guy in candidate for a lot of people. So we do typically see rostership on Radford more often than the rest of the team. Jace Carter has played 18 and 19 minutes as a semi-cheaper guard option. Not really in love with him. And then with Levesque, You get Washington minutes. He played 23 minutes against Commerce in their first game, looked really solid. Against Ohio State, he had major foul trouble, played only 13. Without foul trouble, I do think Washington plays around 20 to 22 minutes a game this season. He is somewhat interesting at 4-2 against the SMU front court, but that's a very reckless main team type of play. That's just me giving you some additional plays to expand out your player pool for the $10 or the $15 GPP if you wish to play it. SMU, it is worth noting that Zurich Phelps is broken. And his broken is still pretty good, 20 fantasy points a game, but not at 8-7. There was rumors on Twitter that he missed a team meeting. I don't know how true that actually was, but in the Western Illinois game, he ended up coming off the bench. What happened there is it led to me fading him. It led to a lot of people still being on him because the news came out so late. A few of us went to BJ Edwards. He had a fantastic game, 8 points, 9 rebounds, 9 assists. And then what happened was Zurich Phelps came off the bench because there were no news, no SMU beat writer having an inkling that, hey, Phelps is not starting. He's not. That would have been useful information, right? To have more than just 2 minutes before lock. Only played 16 minutes. Ended up taking 13 shots, but obviously didn't pan out because he played 16 minutes. Then against Lamar in a game that Lamar actually gave him, had him kind of nervous there for a while. Phelps did start, but played less than 30 minutes. So back in the starting lineup, they kept BJ Edwards in the starting lineup, which is intriguing. And they didn't get a lot out of him. 6 points, 3 rebounds, 5 assists, shot 1 for 8. So I don't know that Phelps is truly broken, but there's definitely something going on with him right now that we can't justify paying almost $9K for, especially against a tougher matchup like Texas A&M. And we have a guy like Trey Alexander in a much better much better environment. And his price point is just about the same, right? So I'd much rather play Alexander than Phelps at this moment. Jalen Smith did go to the bench there with Phelps back. Jalen Smith started the first 2 games. He was phenomenal against Western Illinois, but I remember specifically saying, as a dynasty owner of Jalen Smith last year, not anymore, this is not his game. Do not expect this to continue. And he played more minutes off the bench, but he was even worse as anticipated. So I think they're here to stay with BJ Edwards in the starting lineup. I think he's the guy that can initiate this offense and allow Chuck Harris and Zurich Phelps to play off the ball and kind of just do what they do, which is shoot. Keon Ambrose Hilton and Samuel Williamson round out the rest of the starting 5 as front court players. I do like Samuel Williamson as a kind of high-level GPP play in that low 7K range. Rebounds at a high level, shoots a ton of shots, gets himself, involved in multiple categories. Do worry about him sometimes because there are guards on this team that will take a lot of shots and not pass a ton, Phelps and Chuck Harris, and sometimes that will negatively impact Williamson. And it's a similar way with him, shots maybe not coming his way, kind of like with Trey Mitchell of Kentucky. When he does get the ball in maybe not a great spot, he'll force up a shot because he's not getting them. So instead of letting that game come to him, as they say, he forces up a ton of inefficient stuff. But he's certainly somebody to look at. You might be asking about Tyreek Smith. He's 7'6", which still is a price that makes me shudder even more than when he was 6'7". I realize he's been absolutely phenomenal. 24 fantasy points in 14 minutes against Western Illinois, 31 in 21 minutes against Lamar. He's just a shot blocking machine right now. He isn't starting. He's coming off the bench in a 20-minute role. Can you really pay $8K for a guy like that that's reliant on blocks? He's rebounding at a high level, which is something that he did at Oklahoma State. Right now, he's the 3rd best block rate in the country and a top 25 offensive rebounding rate. Very high usage rate as well off the bench. But that's a really tough sell for me, especially when we're using this guy at 3.7 and 4.5 last year. And I know it's a different team, different role, but still, I'm not sure that I can dedicate that 8K price point. And he's definitely a guy to throw into a GPP lineup. I feel like I'm copping out a lot tonight. I hate doing that, but there's 9 games. There's a bunch of GPP options on this slate with a 10K up top price. So you have to throw in some randomness sometimes to be able to win those top end tournaments. I don't see Tyreek Smith being chased by the masses. I think most people playing right now are smart enough to realize he's not starting, and this level of production probably can't continue. But geez, he is just going absolutely nuts with his rebounding and his blocking right now. And he's actually scoring, which is something we're not accustomed to seeing from him. But a lot of those are putbacks and bunnies and stuff. So if you want to use him at 8K in a GPP, go for it. But do not show me any lineups tomorrow that have him in and ask me, like, is this okay for Maine? Because I will ask you to probably remove him. And then there's a good chance he puts up 30, 35. And then you'll look at me like, why'd you tell me to do that? But I just want to make it clear he's gonna have the old pumpkin carriage pop, and Midnight's gonna strike at any moment, and he has a 3 to 5 fantasy point game brewing somewhere in there, or maybe he won't. Maybe he's just the greatest player ever now. I really like BJ Edwards transferring from Tennessee. 5-3, his price has come up a little bit after obviously a monster game at Western Illinois, but just a really nice like 4.5x play here at 5-3, and somebody who maybe a last guy in type level. There's been some really solid and nice options at the like low to mid 5K range this first week of the season, and he's definitely somebody that I have interest in for that reason. All right, we got to push it a little bit. I've been yammering on too long. UNCG versus Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt, man, I don't know. I don't know that Stackhouse is long for this world. They just held off a very feisty USC Upstate team. They lost to Presbyterian as large home favorites. They're a very slow team as usual. Their defense is middling. They're playing a Greensboro team that's very slow as well, has a slightly better defense. Vanderbilt's definitely they're on watch here for being upset potentially. At this point, there's certain teams where we can take like small dogs and these like low to mid majors playing these very vulnerable high major teams such as Vanderbilt. And this is certainly a spot where we might be able to get away with a bet against Vandy. It's a lot of games tomorrow. The slate could have been a lot bigger here. All right, so UNCG's only plus 2.5. I was hoping for like a +8 number there, but I guess Vegas is just too smart for us. So UNCG obviously in play here. Let's start with them. Give you their starting 5 here. In the game against North Carolina A&T, they scored 94 points. Donovan Atwell, Kobe Langley, Keyshawn Langley, Jalen Breath, and Mikael Brown-Jones were their starters. They did bring off 4 different players off the bench who played 14 or more minutes, one of which was Miles Jones. And there's just going to be a limited amount of fantasy goodness usually for this UNCG team, I think, just because I do believe they'll have a deeper rotation, but they are attractive against Vanderbilt. And like I said, a vulnerable Vanderbilt team at that, with Kobe Langley, who's 5'8", had 10 assists in that game against NC A&T. Want to temper expectations here because at least Vanderbilt can say they're better than UNC A&T, right? Keyshawn Langley sitting there at 5'9" after a 12-7-3 game. Both of the Langleys are intriguing options. Brown-Jones at 5'4", 13 rebounds. I think that any of those guys can be used. Even Atwell sitting there at 4K. He does carry guard forward eligibility. We can get ourselves another cheap forward option there, playing 30-plus minutes in their first game. Hit 4 triples, 18.6 rebounds. Again, there's going to be a lot of busts coming out of this game, I think, because there will be some step backs taken by these UNCG guys. But then again, maybe not as plus 2.5 point dogs. You're talking about a situation where Vanderbilt could actually lose this game. And if they do, those Greensboro starters could actually end up all paying off. Bench pieces like Breath at 3.5, Caesar at 3.7. There's some real intrigue and appeal here in a lot of these guys. Atwell last year as a freshman in a limited role off the bench had a usage rate of 22% and a shot rate of 28%. Shot about 33% from long range. So I do think Atwell continues to see his role increase significantly. Kobe Langley, very high assist rate, last year, 29%, second best in the conference last season. You saw his high assist rate this year so far, ninth best in the country, and he had those 10 dimes. So that is really the game that he's going to be about. About a 39% three-point shooter, hit 3 of his 5 in his first game there. He's been in Greensboro for a long time. He was another player who came off the bench for them last year, now in a starter role. So you're having a lot of these upperclassmen who have been with the program a while and are now starting to get their opportunities. And they'll get a chance to really show out here against this Vanderbilt team. Atwell being my favorite team or favorite player here, and then the Kobe Langley variety of Langley at 5'8", just because of his high assist rate. Vanderbilt ended up going into that Presbyterian game without Tyron Lawrence, which obviously was brutal. Without Van Allen Lubin, their Notre Dame transfer, that was brutal. Lee Dort, who I love, he wasn't able to play, dealing with a foot issue. So you're looking at a lot of guys, and they're still with questionable tags here. So Vanderbilt, without their full roster at their disposal, it's going to be a tough road. The starting 5 that we're looking at here: Ezra Mannion, Colin Smith, Evan Taylor, Isaiah West, and then they went with the freshman Carter Lang in their last game. Paul Lewis was the one who started before him, and Tassos Kamateros. Now, what Stackhouse did last year was he would bring his starters, or at least his starting level players, off the bench, and he'd screw around like this. And you saw him. He did it with Carter Lang there. Started and played 15 minutes. Kamateros played 25 off the bench. Paul Lewis played 23. Now, Lewis started in the first game, like I said, and so did Kamateros, and he played more minutes off the bench in game 2 than he did in game 1. The 2 freshmen that started, Isaiah West, who played only 8 minutes in his first game, got the start, played 31 minutes, was okay, and ended up playing more than Evan Taylor, who went from playing as a starter 26 minutes to starter 21 minutes and lost minutes in the second half to Tassos Kamateros. So you really don't know what Stackhouse is going to do on a game-to-game basis with his lineup, except for the fact that Ezra Mannion is going to play every single minute possible. He can't afford not to play Mannion. He's the top player on the team at this point. Colin Smith did play 31 minutes there, 8 points, 9 rebounds. We have been waiting for Colin Smith's turn. This definitely seems like it's that time now. Back-to-back games over 27 minutes. He is at 4.5K against a Greensboro team that should enable him to grab rebounds. If the players on their roster and from last year's efficiency on their rebounding, that's any indication, Colin Smith could have a really nice game at 4-5 here. If Van Allen Lubin were to play, that would be a downgrade to Smith's usage and overall rebounding upside. So we'll keep an eye on that, but I certainly think Colin Smith is main team viable here. Ezra Mannion at 6'8", he's clearly underpriced for the role he's going to have if they're going to be without Tyron Lawrence for any significant time. And even Dort, who I expect to take a step up this year, Mannion's just going to have a ton of shots available to him. He's still facilitating quite well, even with the roster that leaves very little excitement. 7 assists in their last game. He's just a kind of do-it-all player and not afraid to lead this team. So love Ezra Mannion there at 6'8". He ended up being way lower owned in that first slate than I thought, like, I don't know, 7%. And I was expecting a lot more, like 25 to 30, which was very shocking to me at the time, considering his price and all the people that were out. So Mannion and Colin Smith are our looks here. On the Greensboro side, Kobe Langley and Atwell is our favorite plays. Last game on the slate, UC Irvine versus USC. If you haven't used Isaiah Collier yet, why not? He is just awesome. That first slate of the season against K-State, we were all over him. He had a fantastic first half. Foul trouble happened, ended up fouling out of that game in 26 minutes. Had the 28 fantasy points. It was definitely not what we wanted out of him, but you could see just how good this kid is going to be this year. Followed that up against Bakersfield, played 34 minutes, didn't get into foul trouble there. Put up a 37, 19 points, 3 rebounds, 5 assists, 4 steals. Get used to Collier. He's going to be putting up big stat lines like that. He plays in a backcourt with Boogie Ellis that is easily the best backcourt in the conference of the Pac-12 and might even be a top 5 backcourt in the entire nation. I don't know that the Trojans get that kind of love just yet. Boogie Ellis at 9K is your high-level GPP play that most people will be off. You see the downside there. He had 22 against Bakersfield. in that blowout in a game that was never really super close against K-State, but he played 36 minutes. He had almost 50. So you know what you're going to get out of Boogie is typically that high upside and generally going to be above 30 fantasy points. At this point, I'll take the discount on Collier for now. We will see what happens with Kobe Johnson, who ended up missing their game against Bakersfield after putting up a 36 against K-State, in which he had 8 rebounds, which was surprising. The 4 steals wasn't surprising. The 16 real points was surprising. I don't expect Kobe Johnson to be a big-time scorer for this team. But if he returns, that muddies the water slightly, but not for Collier, obviously. He's still our top guy. That would be a bite out of a Renton Page, who played some minutes on the wing last time out. And then the sub 4K kid, Oziah Sellers, who played 25 minutes in place of Kobe Johnson, scored 16 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, shot 6 of 9 from the field, hit a couple of threes, and scored 28 fantasy points at near min price. If we get news that Johnson is out once more, Sellers obviously already showed he could be viable at 3.8. They're playing against UC Irvine. This Irvine team, I don't think, is going to be anywhere near the level they were in the years past. Look for Sellers to be a main team play at that option. But the problem is it's the last game on the slate, so we're going to have to hope for that news later or earlier in the day or right before Creighton. You're going to have to make a decision, and hopefully we have enough on our plate to really make that choice, because you're probably going to have to either leave 2 to 3 spots open if you're going to wait until you get that news, or you're just going to have to decide I can't use Sellers, or I am going to use Sellers, because on the other side, on the Irvine group, you're going to end up with a very low level value, I think, if you do that. Speaking of Irvine, let's talk about them, and then we'll head on out. Close loss to San Jose State, a nice win over New Mexico State. The starting 5, Andre Henry, Justin Hone, Pierre Cockrell, Pent Luchen. I tried to practice that one before the show. I think I still messed it up. Devin Tillis, Dean Keeler, Langston Redfield, and Darren Sarin. Yep, that is a real name. They all came off the bench, played 17 plus minutes. You're looking at a rotation of 8 to 9 players. None of the Irvine guys particularly expensive. Irvine definitely lost some really key pieces from last year to the transfer portal, and Dawson Baker and DJ Davis. Returning Justin Hone. Hone last year had a 26% shot rate and a 25% usage rate. Those numbers so far are sitting around 21 and 23, shooting a 33% from long range. His assist rate is down, and it seems that the early production from Devin Tillis, who has seen spikes in his shot rate, has really hurt him so far. The value on the team, Andre Henry, who did play extended minutes in their previous game, 29 and 28 in the first, scored 30 fantasy points against New Mexico State, 20 against San Jose State, has taken almost 20 shots in those 2 games at 4.5K. So we have another value available to us. Now, he's a little more expensive than Sellers. So if you do this right, you will have to leave yourself with, $700-800 in salary, which I have no problem doing. I know a lot of people get weirded out by that. I think at this point I'm playing Collier as my hammer play, so I'm not going to take him out. So you're either going to have a third, or you're going to have to just leave that salary and go from Sellers to Henry, which I think is fine, or leave even more and go to Justin Hone, who, like I said, had one of the third highest usage rate on the team last year. Did show out against New Mexico State. He was very ordinary against San Jose State, but at 4.9, Justin Hone, with what I think his usage rate will end up being, is kind of a sneakier play there, and somebody that you could get away with in using your main lineup, because I do believe he'll be one of the top players on this team. In the front court, Devin Tillis, 40 spot against New Mexico State, 18 and 10. Do not expect him to do that against the Trojans. I think Josh Morgan gives him a little bit of trouble there. Crockrell at 5'1", not really interested. Luke Den at 5'5", not interested either. It would really just be Henry or Hone, both of which I think are very, very reasonable prices. The Trojans' perimeter defense is going to be tough to target against this year, but we did see Higgins of Bakersfield get off on them, and I think Henry or Hone could do the same based on the volume that I'm expecting from them. All right, we managed to string this one out for a while. You got me in a mood to talk. So core, this is gonna be tough because it's gonna be just like today. There's just so many viable plays. I'm actually kind of glad that Randall's on the article because need more time to internalize this. I will in the Discord post my player pool for our members and my core if it's changed there as well, so you can expect that. But as of now, show core, Trey Alexander. I think I'm sticking with what I said earlier. 8.8K, my top pay up. There is a myriad of pay ups above him, and I really think that 2, 3, 4 of them could pay out. But I think Trey Alexander is just the one I'm most comfortable with when you base price, matchup, role on the team. He just seems very, very strong and somebody that I feel pretty damn good about. I also really want to fit Kevin McCullough. I think he's like borderline core. He's not going to be in the official show core, but Kevin McCullough at 7-2. Depending on what type of lineup you're going to make, you probably want to keep him handy. This may surprise you. Core number 2, I'm buying all the way in on Waddell at 4-5. This is one of those spots like with Johan Traore today. Like you've got a cheap, slightly for the talent underpriced prospect who top like Traore's top 30. Didn't get it going in Auburn. You knew in that spot he was if he got the minutes, and he did, and it just was like too good of a spot to pass up. Now that was the difference between 3K and 4-5. And Waddell could do a lot of damage to our lineup if he doesn't pay off at 4-5 because I've listed 7, 8, 9, 10 other sub 5K players that you could utilize. And obviously some of those are all going to go for 3, 4, 5x and pay off in a big way. Waddell going for 1 or 2x would be a disaster. But I am very confident, as confident as I was in Traore today. And I think at 4-5, I'll do some more reading on that. But his minutes, I think, are going to be here to stay. I don't think they can afford to not keep him on the floor for 20-plus minutes. And he's going to be a guy that, like I said, plays his way into a lottery status. He's already being talked about as a lotto pick, and he has not even played 2 college games yet. So Waddell is core play number 2. I know that'll surprise some of you, but that's what we do on this show. We give you the line in the sand plays. And then the third core is Terry Shannon. Terry Shannon scares the hell out of me because every time I feel all in on Terry Shannon, he rewards me with a 2.5x performance. When I am not expecting Terry Shannon to break the slate is when he does it. So take that for what it's worth if you want to play that card, but he is the third member of the core, Terry Shannon, and you see I'm already kind of gravitating towards some of these mid 6 to 7K range guys. Just going to try to play as many of them as I can before I have to feel obligated to play Mintz, Filipkowski, Dickinson, Alexander all into one lineup. Although it could be done because of the fact that there are literally 10 sub 5K players that you could utilize. If there was I'm kind of doing this gimmick. Obviously, Collier is right up there too, by the way, for those of you wondering. I am doing the gimmick where I'm not doing a posh play of the day yet, but if I were to do a posh play, this player would be the posh play of the day. Say that 10 times fast. So if I were doing posh play of the day, there is one player that stands out above the rest, and you have to go to the toothpaste university, Colgate, Patriot League's finest, and look at a 6.6K Braden Smith, who I think is going to absolutely terrorize Syracuse tomorrow/today. And he's somebody that I'm certainly gravitating towards. There is some downside there. We saw with TJ Weeks and some other mid-major guys. Sometimes they struggle in these spots, but Colgate has owned Syracuse over the last 2 years. Don't think that changes with the new coach, new regime. Braden Smith already was a part of that program last year when they did it, and he is going to absolutely put forth a Tucker Richardson-like performance of 40-plus fantasy points. So enjoy that if you guys utilize Braden Smith of Colgate, because he is going to reward us handsomely. PrizePicks, there's not a lot out just yet. I love AJ Storr's PRA prop of 17. I am hitting the over 17 with confidence. Devin Carter has a 22.5 PRA, hitting that with confidence. They're also trying to bait me with Bryce Hopkins 22.5 PRA. I lean the over there as well. But if I'm taking Carter or Hopkins, and I can only take one, Carter would be the one. Just so we're clear on that. Jaden Akins over 15.5 PRA. He was a steals master last game, but I just feel like he's going to score 20 real points in this one. Speaking of which, we can get his points at 10 on PrizePicks. Take the over 10 points on Jaden Akins. Let's see if they give us any props yet on DraftKings. They did. AJ Store minus 145, so we'll have to find a pair with it on the parlay or something, but over 12.5 real points for AJ Store. That just feels like the gimme. The Terrence Williams over 8.5 points today, which DK gave us plus money, by the way. That was like a super gimme. This isn't a super gimme on AJ Store over 12.5, but it's a gimme for sure. So expect good things with that one. Let's go down to our guys at Kansas and see what our KJ Adams number is at, because we're getting that KJ Adams PRA to the window often last year and already twice this year. 15.5 again, just like clockwork, minus 110. Yes, it's against Kentucky, but KJ Adams, 10 points, 7 rebounds, a couple of assists. That just it's not that much. It's really not that much. So over 15.5 PRA for KJ Adams. That one seems to get to the window way more often than it doesn't. So I'll go right back to it. And then let's see. Trey Alexander's got a 25.5 number, but that's probably, we don't need to take that. Let's see what Ryan Kalkbrenner's rebounds are for shits and gigs. 5.5 at plus 115. It's just so hard not to want to take his rebounding number, but he's just not getting it. He's just not getting it. But plus 115 at 5.5 for the 7-foot MFer. Grab a rebound. Grab a rebound instead of getting mono, Ryan. Damn, that's going to be a tough one to get away from, even though I know he's just not going to hit it. So there's my props. There's my PrizePicks plays. There's my core and DraftKings. Again, Randall will be on the article tomorrow. I will still be around doing my thing. There's also college football starting again tomorrow. Weekday Maction, Slates, and Fun Belt. We'll have an article for that. But I'll be back here tomorrow night, same time, same place, covering the, what are we on here? Wednesday slate of DK-focused materials. Please continue to support the show with likes, comments, and shares. Take advantage of that promo code NIGHTHOOPS while you still can. 50% off your first month. Any FTN daily package. It really is a great deal. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate y'all as usual. And I'll see you tomorrow night.